Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant and watched the stars through the main viewport. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in human space, and nothing seemed out of place. His crew moved around their stations with practiced ease, and the hum of the ship's engines provided a steady background, rhythm that had become comforting over the years. Jake had been commanding the Defiant for 3 years now, and he knew every sound the ship made and every quirk of her systems. The battlecruiser was one of humanity's finest vessels, and she had served Earth well during the brief territorial disputes with the Corvon trading guilds 2 years back. Now they were on routine patrol near the outer colonies, and Jake expected nothing more exciting than checking cargo, manifests, and responding to the occasional distress beacon from miners who got their equipment stuck in asteroid fields. Lisa Grant sat at the communications station running through the daily reports. She was young for her position, but she had proven herself capable time and again. Her fingers moved across her console with quick efficiency as she sorted through dozens of automated messages from nearby colonies and trading posts. Most of it was routine traffic, but then something caught her attention. A priority signal was coming through on all frequencies at once. That was unusual. In fact, it was unprecedented. Lisa frowned and tapped her earpiece to make sure she was hearing correctly. The signal was strong and clear, and it was being broadcast to every human vessel and colony. Simultaneously, Jake noticed her expression change. He turned from the viewport and walked over to her station. Lisa looked up at him with concern in her eyes. She told him that they were receiving a transmission from the Galaxy Council. Jake felt his stomach tighten. The Galaxy Council rarely contacted humanity directly. Most communication went through official diplomatic channels, and even then it was usually just procedural updates or invitations to minor trade conferences. For the Council to broadcast on all frequencies meant something significant was happening. Lisa routed the transmission to the main screen. The image that appeared showed a tall figure in elaborate robes standing in what looked like a massive chamber. The figure was not human. Ambassador Peter Hayes was a Valorian, and his species had been part of the galactic community for over 3,000 years. His face was angular with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. Behind him, Jake could see other figures moving in the shadows, and the architecture suggested a place of great importance. This was being broadcast from the council chambers themselves. Ambassador Hayes began to speak. His voice was calm and measured, as if he were discussing something as simple as trade agreements or navigation rights. But the words he spoke made Jake's blood run cold. The Galaxy Council had decided that humanity must now pay tribute. Every species under the Council's protection was required to contribute to the maintenance of galactic peace and order. Humanity had been given a grace period of 15 years since first contact to establish themselves and prove their worth. That grace period was now over. The tribute required from humanity was substantial. Earth and all its colonies must provide 30% of all industrial output to the Council. They must grant the Council full access to Earth's biological diversity for research purposes. And they must provide 10,000 soldiers every year to serve in the Council's peacekeeping forces. Jake stood frozen as the message continued. Ambassador Hayes explained that this was not negotiable. Every species in the known galaxy paid tribute in one form or another. It was the price of protection and participation in galactic society. The Council had already calculated Earth's capacity and determined that these requirements were fair and reasonable. Humanity had 72 hours to formally accept the terms. Failure to comply would result in immediate sanctions and possible military action. The transmission ended with a Council seal appearing on the screen, and then the channel went silent. The bridge was quiet for a long moment. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Lisa turned in her chair and looked at him, waiting for orders. The other crew members had stopped what they were doing and were staring at the no-blank screen. Jake took a deep breath and told Lisa to forward the message to Earth immediately. He then told his tactical officer to begin running defensive scenarios. He did not know what Earth's response would be, but he wanted the Defiant ready for anything. On Earth, the message reached the United Earth government within minutes. President Helen Clark was in a meeting with her economic advisors when her assistant interrupted. The look on the assistant's face told her everything she needed to know. Something bad had happened. Helen excused herself and went directly to the Situation Room where her key advisors were already gathering. The room had screens on every wall, showing data feeds from across human space. Helen sat at the head of the table and watched the council's message play out on the central screen. She did not interrupt. She let the ambassador's words wash over her and tried to keep her face neutral. Even though her mind was racing, when the message ended, she looked around the table. Military Commander Greg Phillips was already pulling up fleet readiness reports. Chief Diplomat Amanda Foster was frantically searching through treaty documents looking for any legal precedent. Science Advisor Dr. Laura Bennett sat quietly with her hands folded and a grim expression on her face. Helen asked for opinions. Greg spoke first. He said they should reject the demands immediately. 30% of industrial output would cripple Earth's economy. 10,000 soldiers a year would drain their military. And giving the Council access to Earth's biology was unthinkable. Who knew what they would do with that information? The Council might use Earth's genetic diversity for weapons research or sell it to the highest bidder. Greg argued that humanity should never have trusted the Council in the first place. They had been too eager to join the galactic community, and now they were paying the price. Amanda disagreed. She reminded everyone that humanity had barely 300 warships. The Council's combined fleets numbered in the hundreds of thousands. A military confrontation would be suicide. Even if Earth could win a few battles, the Council could simply blockade human space and starve them out. No supplies would get through. No trade would be possible. Earth's colonies would be cut off and left to die. Amanda argued that they needed to negotiate. Perhaps they could reduce the tribute percentage or spread the payments out over a longer period. Perhaps they could offer something else in exchange. But outright rejection was not an option unless humanity was prepared to face extinction. Dr. Bennett finally spoke. She had been studying the Council for years, and she had information that the others needed to hear. The Council had done this before. Many times, every species that reached a certain level of development received the same demand. Some accepted immediately. Others tried to negotiate. A few refused. Those who refused were made examples of. The Yalari had been a powerful warrior race with a fleet that rivaled any in the galaxy. When they rejected the Council's tribute demands 60 years ago, the Council had crushed them. Their homeworld was blockaded. Their colonies were seized. Their military was destroyed, piece by piece, over a decade-long campaign. Now, the Yalari served the Council as enforcers, and they had no choice in the matter. Their entire civilization had been reduced to vassal. Helen listened to all of this and felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She told her advisors that she needed time to think. She ordered them to prepare detailed reports on every option, including full military, readiness assessments, and economic impact studies. She also told Amanda to reach out to Ambassador Kevin Wright, who was currently stationed at the Council headquarters. She wanted to know everything he could find out about the Council's intentions, and whether there was any room for negotiation. Then she dismissed everyone except Greg. When they were alone, she asked him a question that had been burning in her mind. She asked if humanity could actually win a war against the Council. Greg looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her the truth. In a conventional war, they would lose. But humanity did not fight conventional wars. They were innovators. They were survivors. They had crawled up from caves to reach the stars in just a few thousand years. If it came to war, humanity would find a way to make the Council bleed. It might not be enough to win, but it would be enough to make them regret ever threatening Earth. Helen nodded slowly. That was what she needed to know. Dr. Laura Bennett stood in front of the large conference room screen and began her presentation. President Helen Clark sat at the table along with 24 of Earth's top military and political leaders. Laura had spent the last 20 hours compiling everything humanity knew about the Galaxy Council and its history. What she had found was disturbing. She started by explaining that the Council had not always been the dominant power in the galaxy. 2,000 years ago, there had been dozens of independent civilizations, all competing for resources and territory. The two largest empires were the Vrex and the Korthon. They had been on the brink of a catastrophic war that would have consumed half the galaxy. Billions would have died. Entire star systems would have been destroyed. It was then that 12 species came together to form what they called the Mediation Council. The original purpose was noble. These 12 species would act as neutral arbitrators to prevent conflicts before they escalated. They had no military power and no authority beyond what the other species granted them through treaties. For the first few centuries, the Council worked exactly as intended. They negotiated peace treaties and trade agreements, and helped settle disputes over territory and resources. But slowly things began to change. The Council started keeping a small security force to protect their diplomats. Then they expanded that force to patrol trade routes. Then they began offering protection services to smaller species who could not defend themselves. In exchange for this protection, the Council asked for modest contributions. Just enough to maintain their peacekeeping operations, they said. Laura pulled up a timeline on the screen. She showed how the tribute demands had grown over the centuries. What started as voluntary donations became mandatory payments. What started as 5% became 10%, and then 15%. Species that fell behind on payments faced sanctions. Their ships were denied access to major trade routes. Their diplomats were excluded from important negotiations. And if a species refused to pay entirely, the Council had ways of dealing with them. Laura clicked to the next slide, and a star map appeared. Red dots marked the locations of civilizations that had resisted the Council over the past 1,000 years. There were 37 red dots. Laura explained that not one of those civilizations existed anymore as independent entities. Some had been conquered outright. Others had been economically strangled until they collapsed from within. A few had been allowed to survive, but only as puppets with Council-approved governments that did exactly as they were told. The Yalari case was the most recent and the most instructive. Laura brought up images of the Yalari homeworld before and after the Council's intervention. Before the war, the Yalari had been a proud warrior culture with a strong fleet and a thriving economy. Their cities were magnificent, and their technology was among the most advanced in the galaxy. When the Council demanded tribute, the Jalari High Command refused. They believed their military strength would protect them. They were wrong. The Council did not attack directly at first. Instead, they convinced other species to stop trading with the Yalari. Supply lines were cut. Raw materials became scarce. The Yalari economy began to suffer. When the Jalari tried to take what they needed by force, the Council declared them pirates and aggressors. Then the Council fleet moved in. The war lasted 11 years. The Yalari fought brilliantly, but they were outnumbered and isolated. One by one, their colonies fell. Their fleet was destroyed in a series of brutal engagements. Their homeworld was bombarded from orbit until the government surrendered. The Council installed a new administration, and the Yalari were forced to pay not just the original tribute, but reparations for the cost of the war. 60 years later, the Yalari were still paying. Their military now served the Council. Their resources flowed to other worlds. Their people had become second-class citizens in their own territory. Laura let that image sink in. This was what happened to species who said no to the Council. Amanda Foster spoke up. She asked if there was any legal avenue they could pursue. Were there any precedents for negotiating better terms? Laura shook her head. The Council did not negotiate. They calculated what they believed a species could afford, and that was what they demanded. There were no appeals and no exceptions. The only choice was to accept or refuse. Greg Phillips slammed his hand on the table. He said it was extortion, pure and simple. The Council had become exactly what it was created to prevent. They were bullies who used their power to dominate everyone else. Helen remained quiet. She was thinking about the bigger picture. She asked Laura if there were any species within the Council who might be sympathetic to humanity's position. Laura considered the question carefully. She explained that the Council was not unified. The 12 elder species who founded the Council held most of the power, but there were over 100 member species total. Many of the junior members resented the tribute system, but they were too afraid to speak out. There had been whispers of discontent. Some species paid their tribute, but did so reluctantly. The Hilari in particular were known to hate the council, but they had no choice but to serve. If humanity could somehow inspire those dissatisfied species to act, then maybe things could change. But that was a big if. Most species believed the council was too powerful to resist. They had accepted their fate. Ambassador Kevin Wright sent his first detailed report from the council headquarters. He described the massive station where the council conducted its business. It was called Unity Prime, and it orbited a neutron star in neutral space. The station was the size of a small moon, with docking bays for thousands of ships and living quarters for hundreds of thousands of diplomats and staff. The council chambers themselves were at the heart of the station. Kevin had been granted access as humanity's official representative. He described walking through corridors lined with statues and monuments celebrating the council's achievements. Peace treaties from 1,000 years ago were displayed behind protective glass. Weapons from defeated enemies hung on the walls as trophies. The message was clear. The council had power, and they were not afraid to use it. Kevin had been present when the human message was discussed. He described High Chancellor Zenther of the Verks, who presided over the council meetings. Zenther was ancient even by Vrek standards. He had been part of the council for over 400 years. His species were tall and reptilian with scales that shimmered in different colors depending on their mood. Zenther's scales were usually a deep purple, which Kevin had learned meant confidence and authority. The Chancellor spoke of humanity with barely concealed contempt. He called them children playing at being adults. He said humans had achieved spaceflight only recently, and they still acted like they were alone in the universe. The tribute demand was not punishment, he said. It was education. Humanity needed to learn their place in the galactic order. Kevin also reported on the reactions of other species. Most of the elder species agreed with Zenther. They saw the tribute as routine and necessary. But some of the junior members were watching carefully. The Yalari ambassador in particular seemed interested in how humanity would respond. Kevin had tried to speak with him, but the Yalari had walked away without a word. Still, Kevin sensed something there. Perhaps anger. Perhaps hope. It was hard to tell. Back on Earth, President Clark met with her cabinet in private. The 72-hour deadline was approaching. She had read all the reports and listened to all the arguments. The choice before her was simple in theory, but devastating in practice. Accept the tribute and condemn humanity to slow economic decline and loss of sovereignty. Refuse the tribute and face almost certain military destruction. There was no good option. Amanda Foster suggested a middle path. They could accept the tribute temporarily while secretly building up their military. In 10 or 20 years, humanity might be strong enough to break free. Greg Phillips rejected that idea immediately. He said the council would never allow humanity to build up that kind of strength. They would see it coming and crush Earth before it became a threat. Besides, accepting tribute, even temporarily, would break something essential in the human spirit. People needed to believe their government would stand up for them. Helen thought about her daughter, Emma. The girl was 16 and full of dreams about exploring the galaxy and meeting alien species and discovering new worlds. What kind of future would Emma have if humanity accepted the council's demands? She would grow up in a world where freedom was something other species had, but humans did not. She would learn that when faced with a bully, the proper response was to hand over your lunch money and say thank you. Helen had not fought her way to the presidency to teach her daughter that lesson. She looked around the table at the faces of people she trusted. She asked them one final question. If they voted to refuse the tribute, would they stand by that decision, even when the council fleet arrived? Every person in the room said yes. Helen nodded slowly. She had her answer. Now she just needed to figure out how to deliver it, President. Helen Clark sat alone in her office as the sun set over the Capitol. The 72-hour deadline was now down to just 6 hours. Her advisors had left her to make the final decision. Through her window, she could see people in the streets. Some were protesting and demanding that Earth stand strong. Others were gathering in churches and temples praying for peace. News broadcasts showed families on the colony worlds packing emergency supplies and preparing for the worst. Everyone knew that whatever happened next would change humanity forever. Helen had not slept in 2 days. She had reviewed every report and every analysis. She had consulted with military experts and economists and philosophers. Now it came down to a simple choice that was anything but simple. She thought about the easy path. They could accept the tribute. Life would go on. People would still go to work and raise their families and pursue their dreams. Yes, they would be poorer. Yes, they would have less freedom. But they would be alive. The Council would protect them from external threats, and humanity could focus on slow, steady growth. In a few generations, maybe people would not even remember what it was like to be truly independent. Maybe that would be enough. Helen picked up a photograph from her desk. It showed her grandfather, who had fought in Earth's last major war decades ago. He had been a soldier who believed in something bigger than himself. He used to tell her stories about the men and women who sacrificed everything so that future generations could live in freedom. What would he think of her if she chose submission? Helen put down the photograph and opened her computer. She began recording a message. Not the official response to the council, but something personal. She spoke about what it meant to be human. She talked about the long journey from caves to cities to spacecraft. She reminded people that humanity had always faced impossible odds. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and disasters that should have wiped them out. Every time they had found a way forward, not because they were stronger or smarter than other species, but because they refused to give up. Because when faced with a choice between freedom and safety, they had always chosen freedom. Even when it cost them everything, she finished recording and saved the file. Then she made a call. She contacted Captain Jake Morrison on the Defiant and Ambassador Kevin, right at Unity Prime. When both men appeared on her screen, she looked at them carefully. These were people who had dedicated their lives to serving humanity. Jake had commanded ships in combat. Kevin had negotiated with species who saw humans as primitive barbarians. She asked them both a direct question. What did they believe humanity should do? Jake answered first. He said he was a soldier, and soldiers understood sacrifice. But there were different kinds of sacrifice. Dying for your principles was noble. Living without principles was worse than death. If humanity accepted the Council's demands, they would survive, but they would lose the thing that made them human. Their spirit. Their independence. Their refusal to bow to tyrants. Kevin spoke next. He had spent weeks at Unity Prime walking among species who had accepted the Council's authority. He had seen the look in their eyes. It was not peace. It was resignation. These species had given up fighting, and in doing so, they had given up hope. They went through the motions of civilization, but there was no passion left. No drive to explore or create or challenge the status quo. The Council liked it that way. Obedient subjects were easier to manage than free people. Kevin told Helen that he had watched the Council members discuss humanity. They were so confident, so certain that humans would fall in line like everyone else. Kevin wanted to prove them wrong. Not out of spite, but because someone needed to show the galaxy that the Council was not invincible. Helen thanked them both and ended the call. She sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. In her mind, she replayed every argument for and against resistance. The practical side of her brain screamed that this was suicide. Earth could not win a military confrontation. The numbers did not lie. But another part of her brain asked a different question. What was the point of survival if you lost everything worth living for? She thought about Emma again. Her daughter, who wanted to explore the stars. If Helen accepted the tribute, Emma would still get to see the galaxy. But she would see it as a second-class citizen. As someone whose species had been conquered without firing a shot, Helen realized she could not do that to her daughter. She could not do that to any human child. She opened a new file and began composing. Earth's official response to the Galaxy Council. She wrote several drafts. Each one was longer and more detailed than the last. She explained humanity's position. She cited historical examples. She made legal arguments about sovereignty and self-determination. But as she read through what she had written, she realized it was all wrong. The Council did not care about arguments or explanations. They only cared about power and compliance. Anything she said would be dismissed as the desperate pleading of a weak species. So Helen deleted everything and started over. This time she kept it simple. She thought about what message would capture humanity's response in a way that could not be misunderstood or ignored. She typed one word, then she stared at it for a long moment. It was such a small word, just 2 letters, but it contained everything humanity was feeling. All the anger and defiance and determination. She saved the file and scheduled it to be transmitted to Unity Prime in 1 hour. Then she called her cabinet back together. When everyone had assembled, she told them what she had decided. The room fell silent. Amanda Foster looked pale. Greg Phillips nodded slowly, with something like pride in his eyes. Dr. Laura Bennett asked if Helen was certain. Helen said she had never been more certain of anything in her life. She explained that she would take full responsibility for whatever happened next. If Earth survived, she would face judgment for her decision. If Earth fell, then history would judge her as the president who doomed humanity. Either way, she could live with the consequences because she knew in her heart that this was right. The message transmitted exactly on schedule. It took several minutes to reach Unity Prime because of the distance. Ambassador Kevin Wright was in his quarters when he received notification that an official response from Earth had arrived. He pulled it up on his screen, expecting pages of diplomatic language. Instead, he saw a single word displayed in simple text. No. Kevin felt a chill run down his spine. He immediately headed to the council chambers. He wanted to see Zenthar's reaction in person. When he arrived, other ambassadors were already gathering. Word was spreading fast. The human response had been distributed to all council members. Kevin found a spot near the back of the chamber and waited. "Hi, Chancellor." Zenthar entered the room with his usual confident stride. His scales were still purple, showing his certainty that this would be a routine matter. He activated the central display and pulled up Earth's response. The single word appeared on screens throughout the chamber. For a moment, there was complete silence. Zenthar stared at the display as if he could not believe what he was seeing. Then his scales began to shift color. Purple faded to red, which Kevin had learned meant anger. The Chancellor's voice boomed through the chamber. He declared that humanity was in violation of galactic law. They had rejected the Council's authority. Such defiance could not be tolerated. He immediately called for a vote to authorize military action against Earth. The vote was swift. 10 of the 12 elder species voted yes. Only 2 abstained. Dozens of junior species tried to voice concerns, but they were ignored. The Council had made its decision. High Chancellor Zenthar ordered Fleet Admiral Corthan to assemble an armada. 400 warships would be dispatched to human space. Their mission was simple: force Earth to comply or destroy their capacity to resist. The galaxy would see what happened to species who defied the Council. Kevin Wright watched all of this with a sinking feeling in his stomach. He had known this would be the response, but seeing it happen was different from imagining it. He caught the eye of the Yalari ambassador across the chamber. For just a moment, their gazes met. The Yalari gave a slight nod. Kevin did not know what it meant, but he hoped it was a sign of respect. On Earth, the news spread within minutes. President Clark addressed the world. She explained her decision and why she made it. She told people to prepare, but not to panic. Humanity had faced extinction before and survived. They would survive this too. In the streets, the protests stopped. People went home to their families. Captain Jake Morrison received orders to mobilize every available ship. The defense of Earth was about to begin. Across human space, military personnel reported to their stations. Colony militias activated. Defense platforms went online. Everyone knew the odds. Everyone knew what was coming. But there was something else in the air now. Something that had not been there before. It was determination mixed with pride. Humanity had said no to the most powerful force in the galaxy. Whatever happened next, they would face it standing tall. 3 weeks after Earth sent its response, the Council Armada arrived at the edge of human space. 400 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel in a coordinated formation that was meant to inspire fear. Fleet Admiral Corthan commanded the force from his flagship, the Dominion. He was of Rex like High Chancellor Zenthor, and he had been fighting the Council's wars for 2 centuries. He had crushed rebellions and defeated pirates and brought dozens of worlds to heal. He expected the humans to surrender as soon as they saw his fleet. Most species did. The sight of overwhelming force was usually enough to break their will to resist. But as his sensors began scanning the area around Jupiter's orbit, he realized the humans were not running. They were waiting. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant, surrounded by his command crew. Behind him in a massive formation were every combat-capable ship humanity could muster. Battle cruisers and destroyers and frigates, and even converted cargo haulers with weapons bolted to their hulls. The entire human fleet numbered just 97 warships. It was a pitiful force compared to what approached them, but every single ship was crewed by volunteers who knew exactly what they were facing. Jake looked at the tactical display and watched as 400 red dots appeared on the screen. His tactical off? ICER Lieutenant Sam Porter called out the numbers. They were outnumbered more than 4-1. The Council ships were larger and better armed. In any conventional engagement, humanity would be annihilated within hours. But Jake had no intention of fighting a conventional battle. He opened a fleet-wide channel and gave his orders. All ships were to break into small squadrons of 5 or 6 vessels. They would use hit-and-run tactics, strike hard and fast, and then scatter before the enemy could bring their superior numbers to bear. The human ships had one advantage. They were newer and more maneuverable. Council fleet relied on older designs that prioritized firepower over speed. Jake planned to use that against them. He assigned each squadron a specific target zone and told them to trust their training. Then he closed the channel and looked at his crew. He told them it had been an honor to serve with them. Lisa Grant smiled and said the honor was theirs. Then the battle began. The Council fleet advanced in their traditional formation. 3 lines of ships moving in perfect coordination. It was a formation designed to overwhelm an enemy with concentrated firepower. Fleet Admiral Corthon expected the humans to either flee or form their own defensive line. Instead, the human ships scattered in every direction. Small groups of vessels darted between the Council ships, firing torpedoes and missiles, and then accelerating away before return fire could hit them. Corthon was confused at first. This was not how space battles were fought. There was no honor in running away. But then his damage reports started coming in. 3 of his destroyers had taken critical hits. A cruiser had lost its main engines. The humans were like insects buzzing around a giant. Each individual sting was minor, but together they were causing real damage. On Mars Colony, 7 Ryan Cooper and his engineering team watched the battle unfold on their monitors. They had spent the last 3 weeks preparing for this moment. Hidden in the asteroid belt around Mars were dozens of defense platforms that humanity had built in secret. These were not standard weapons. They were experimental systems using technology the Council had never seen. Railguns that could punch through shields. EMP mines that disabled targeting systems. Drone swarms that could overwhelm point defense. Ryan had helped design many of these systems, and now he was about to see if they worked. Gave the order, and the defense platforms came online. Hundreds of drones launched from hidden bays. Mines drifted into the Council fleet's path disguised as debris. Railgun platforms began charging their weapons. The first Council ship to hit a mine was a destroyer on the outer edge of the formation. The electromagnetic pulse knocked out half its systems in an instant. The ship went dark and began drifting. Then the drones arrived. Small, fast-moving machines that attached themselves to Council ships and began cutting through armor. The Council ships tried to shoot them down, but there were too many. For every drone destroyed, 2 more took its place. Fleet Admiral Corthon realized with growing alarm that the humans had prepared for this battle far better than intelligence had suggested. He ordered his fleet to tighten formation and focus fire on the human capital ships. If he could destroy the Defiant, the rest of the human fleet might lose their nerve. Jake saw the Council fleet shifting to target him, smiled grimly. That was exactly what he wanted. He ordered the Defiant to charge directly at the enemy flagship. It was a crazy move that violated every rule of naval warfare. But Jake was counting on the Council's arrogance. They would see it as a desperate suicide run, and they would focus all their attention on stopping him. That would create openings for the other human squadrons. The Defiant's engines roared as the ship accelerated. Energy beams and missiles filled the space around them. The ship's shields flared as they absorbed hit after hit. Alarms blared across the bridge. Stam Porter called out that shields were down to 60%, then 40%, and 20%. Jake held his course. He needed to get close enough for the plan to work. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Helen Clark watched the battle feeds with General Nathan Cross beside her. The general had activated Project Horizon 30 minutes ago. It was humanity's last resort. A weapon system that had been in development since first contact with the Council. Clark had authorized its use, knowing it might not be enough.
Ow.
She watched as the Defiant took more damage. The ship was trailing atmosphere and debris. It looked like it would break apart at any moment. But Jake kept going. He was almost in range now. Clark whispered a prayer for him and his crew. Then something unexpected happened. On the tactical displays, a new group of ships appeared. They were not human vessels, and they were not part of the Council Armada. They had emerged from faster-than-light travel on the Council fleet's flank. Clark leaned forward, trying to identify them. General Cross ran the signatures through the database. His face went pale. They were Yulari warships. 20 destroyers bearing the markings of the Yulari defense fleet. But the Yulari served the Council. What were they doing here? The answer came a moment later, when the Yulari ships opened fire, not on the humans, but on the Council. Fleet Admiral Corthon could not believe what he was seeing. The Yulari had betrayed the Council, screamed. Orders at his communications officer to contact the Yulari commander and demand an explanation. But the Yulari ships did not respond. They simply kept firing. Their weapons tore into the Council ships from behind. Shields collapsed. Hulls ruptured. The perfect formation began to fall apart. Corthon realized his fleet was now trapped between the humans in front and the Yulari behind. He tried to reorganize his forces, but the human squadrons pressed their attack. The Defiant was still charging forward. More Yulari ships appeared, then ships from other species. Small groups of vessels from civilizations that had suffered under the Council's rule. They had been watching humanity's defiance, and it had inspired them to act. Ambassador Kevin Wright sent a message from Unity Prime that reached Earth minutes later, explained what had happened. When humanity had sent their one-word response, it had echoed through the galaxy. Other species had been watching. The Yulari in particular had been waiting for 60 years for someone to stand against the Council. When they saw humans willing to fight impossible odds, they decided they could not stay silent. The Yulari ambassador had secretly contacted other dissatisfied species. Together they had planned this moment. They knew they could not defeat the Council alone, but they could support humanity. And maybe together, they could change everything. Jake Morrison saw the new ships appear on his tactical display. He did not know who they were or why they were helping, but he was not going to waste the opportunity. He opened fire on the Council flagship with everything the Defiant had left.
Oh, missiles.
And torpedoes and energy beams all launched at once. The Yulari ships focused their fire on the same target. The Dominion's shields buckled under the combined assault. Fleet Admiral Corthon made a decision. He could stay and fight and likely win, but the cost would be enormous. Half his fleet would be destroyed. The Council would question why he had not anticipated the Yulari betrayal. His career would be over, or he could retreat and regroup and return with a larger force. He chose survival. He ordered the fleet to withdraw. The Council ships began pulling back and preparing to jump too. Faster than light travel, the human crews watched in disbelief as the massive armada turned away. They had not won. Not really. The Council could come back with twice as many ships, but they had survived, and they had proven that the Council could be hurt. Jake slumped in his command chair. The Defiant was barely holding together. Half his crew was injured. They had lost 16 ships in the battle. Thousands of humans were dead. But they were still here. Still fighting. Still free. Lisa Grant turned to him with tears in her eyes. She asked what they should do now. Jake looked at the retreating Council fleet and then at the Yulari ships that had come to their aid. He told her to send a message. Thank the Yulari and anyone else who stood with them. Then prepare for round 2, because this was not over. The Galaxy Council chambers at Unity Prime were in chaos. High Chancellor Zenther stood at the center of the room, his scales flashing angry red as he demanded answers. Fleet Admiral Corthon had returned with his armada battered and humiliated. 36 ships had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Thousands of council personnel were dead. But worse than the military losses was the political damage. The Yalari had openly rebelled. 6 other junior species had sent ships to aid humanity. The council's authority was crumbling. Zenthar called for an emergency session. All member species were required to attend. He would make an example of the traitors and crush this rebellion before it spread further. But as ambassadors gathered in the chamber, he noticed something disturbing. Many of the junior species representatives looked defiant rather than afraid. They had seen what happened at Earth. They had watched a weak species stand up to the council and survive. It had given them ideas. Ambassador Kevin Wright walked into the chamber with his head held high. Other ambassadors stared at him, some with hatred, others with barely concealed admiration. Kevin took his place among the junior specie delegations. The Yalari ambassador stood nearby. His name was Viral, and he had served the council for 60 years, while silently hating every moment. Now he looked liberated. He nodded to Kevin, who nodded back. They did not speak, but they understood each other. Zenthar began the session by declaring that humanity and their allies had committed acts of war against the council. He demanded that Earth surrender immediately and submit to occupation. He also demanded that the Yalari government arrest Viral and the ship commanders who had attacked council forces. If these demands were not met within 48 hours, the council would launch a full-scale invasion of both human and Yalari space. He had not asked for permission to speak, but he spoke anyway. He told the chamber that humanity would never surrender. They had said no to the council's tribute demands, and they meant it. Every threat and every show of force only strengthened their resolve. He reminded the council that humanity had allies now. The Yalari were not the only species tired of paying tribute. Others were watching. Others were waiting. If the council attacked Earth again, they would face not just human ships, but a coalition of free species who had decided that enough was enough. Zenthar tried to shout Kevin down, but other ambassadors were standing now. Representatives from small, peaceful species who had never raised their voices before were demanding to be heard. They asked why the council needed so much tribute. They asked why the elder species lived in luxury, while junior members struggled. They asked if the council was supposed to serve the galaxy or rule it. The session dissolved into arguments. Some elder species called for immediate military action. Others urged caution. The junior species delegations were dividing into factions. Some still supported the council out of fear. Others openly sided with humanity. Zenthar realized he was losing control. He called for a vote to authorize the invasion. But 3 of the 12 elder species voted no. They had calculated that the cost of this war was becoming too high. If half the galaxy rebelled, the council would fall. Better to negotiate some kind of compromise. The vote failed. Zenthar's scales turned dark purple, almost black. He had never been defied like this in his 400 years of service. He stormed out of the chamber, leaving the other council members to deal with the chaos. On Earth, President Helen Clark received the news with cautious hope. The council had not authorized another attack. At least not yet. But the danger was far from over. She called a meeting with her advisors to discuss the next steps. General Nathan Cross reported that Earth's defenses were being rebuilt. The ships damaged in the battle were being repaired. New vessels were under construction. But it would take months before they were ready. Dr. Laura Bennett suggested a different approach. She said humanity should not wait for the council to make the next move. They should go on the offensive. Not militarily, but politically. They should reach out to every species that had expressed dissatisfaction with the council. Build a real coalition. Offer an alternative to the tribute system. Amanda Foster agreed. She said the galaxy needed to see that there was another way. A way based on cooperation instead of domination. Helen authorized the plan. Ambassador Kevin Wright began meeting secretly with representatives from dozens of species. He spoke of forming a new organization, not a council that ruled from above, but an alliance of equals. Species would work together voluntarily. They would share resources and technology based on mutual benefit, not forced tribute. Many species were interested but afraid. The The Council still had enormous military power. What would stop them from crushing this new alliance before it could grow strong? Kevin told them about humanity's response, about how a single word had changed everything. He said courage was contagious. When one species stood up, others found the strength to stand as well. The galaxy had been living in fear for too long. It was time to try something different. The Alari were the first to formally join humanity's alliance. They called it the Terra Coalition in honor of Earth. Within weeks, 12 more species joined. Then 20. Then 40. Most were small civilizations without powerful militaries. But together they represented billions of people and thousands of star systems. The Council tried to respond with economic sanctions. They blocked coalition ships from major trade routes. They imposed tariffs and restrictions. But the coalition species began trading with each other instead. They found they did not need the Council's permission to prosper. On Unity Prime, High Chancellor Zenthar watched his empire crumbling. The elder species held emergency meetings to discuss their options. Some argued for total war. Destroy the coalition before it became too strong. Others recognized that such a war would tear the galaxy apart. The Council had always maintained power through a combination of military force and political legitimacy. Now that legitimacy was gone, half the galaxy no longer believed the Council had the right to rule. Captain Jake Morrison spent his days overseeing the Defiant's repairs. The ship had taken tremendous damage, but the crew refused to abandon her. Engineers worked around the clock welding hull breaches and replacing damaged systems. Jake walked through the corridors and saw the determination in every face. These people had looked death in the eye and survived. They had changed. They were harder now, but also more confident. They knew what they were capable of. Jake received a message from his sister on Earth. She told him about the celebrations in the streets. People were calling him a hero. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like someone who had done what needed to be done. He visited the medical bay where injured crew members were recovering. He sat with each person and thanked them for their service. Many would carry scars for the rest of their lives. But they told him it was worth it. They had fought for something that mattered. 6 months after the battle, the Galaxy Council held another vote. This time the question was whether to dissolve the tribute system. The junior species delegations had enough votes to force the issue. The debate lasted 3 days. Elder species argued that the tribute system maintained order and prevented chaos. Junior species argued that it was nothing more than legalized theft. Ambassador Kevin Wright gave a speech that was broadcast across the galaxy. He spoke about freedom and dignity. He spoke about the right of every species to control their own destiny. He said the Council could choose to evolve into something better, or they could cling to the old ways and watch their authority collapse completely. The choice was theirs. The vote passed by a narrow margin. The tribute system would be phased out over 5 years. Species could choose to contribute to a common defense fund, but it would be voluntary. The Council would become what it was originally meant to be, a forum for negotiation and cooperation rather than an empire. High Chancellor Zenthar resigned in protest. Several other elder species representatives left with him. They formed their own faction, claiming to be the true council. But most species ignored them. The galaxy was moving forward. President Helen Clark received an invitation to address the reformed council. She traveled to Unity Prime with a small delegation. Standing in the great chamber where her ambassador had once been threatened, she spoke about humanity's vision for the future. She said the galaxy did not need rulers. It needed partners. Every species had something to offer. Every civilization had wisdom to share. The Terra Coalition would remain independent, but it would work with the Council to build a better galaxy. Years passed. The Terra Coalition grew stronger. More species joined. The old Council faction tried several times to regain power, but each attempt failed. A new generation grew up knowing a galaxy where freedom was the norm rather than the exception. On Earth, Emma Clark studied xenobiology and dreamed of exploring distant worlds. Her mother had given her that gift. The gift of a future worth living. Captain Jake Morrison eventually retired from military service. He became an instructor, teaching young officers about the battle that changed everything. He always ended his lectures with the same lesson. He told them that courage was not the absence of fear. It was choosing to act despite fear. Humanity had been terrified when they faced the Council, but they had acted anyway. Ambassador Kevin Wright remained at Unity Prime, working to strengthen bonds between species. He often met with Viral, the Yalarai ambassador, who had become a close friend. They would sit together and talk about how close everything had come to disaster, how one different decision could have doomed them all, but they had made the right choice. They had said no when it mattered most. The word echoed through history. Students learned about it in schools. Poets wrote about it. Artists depicted the moment when Earth's simple response appeared on the Council's screens. That single word had contained everything humanity believed. It had expressed their refusal to submit, and their willingness to fight, and their determination to remain free. It had inspired others to find their own courage, and it had changed the galaxy forever. The old order of tribute and domination was gone. In its place grew something new, something built on respect and choice, and the belief that every species deserved the chance to chart their own course among the stars.